August 7th, 1794, was the darkest day of George Washington's presidency. An armed uprising, the Whiskey Rebellion, had exploded across western Pennsylvania, and skirmishes were spilling into nearby counties. Determined to prove that the new Constitution could defend its own laws, Washington invoked the Militia Act, mounted his horse, and personally led nearly 13,000 troops, many veterans of the Revolution, into the troubled frontier. For the first and only time in U.S. history, a sitting president marched at the head of an army against his own citizens, laying bare the fragile line between liberty and order. The rebellion melted away before the column arrived, but the nation would never forget the sight of its founding hero riding out to keep the Union intact. July 14th, 1798, marked the darkest day of John Adams' presidency. With war fever against France boiling and critics hammering his every move, Adams signed the Sedition Act, making it a crime to publish false, scandalous, and malicious words about the government. Overnight, newspaper editors, poets, even a sitting congressman were hauled into court, their presses seized under the glow of partisan torches. What Adams framed as national security looked to many like a muzzle on the very liberty the Revolution had promised, and the backlash split his party, fueled Jeffersonian opposition, and shadowed every page of his legacy. In trying to silence dissent, the second president amplified it, and the young republic discovered just how loudly free speech can roar when threatened. December 22nd, 1807, became the darkest day of Thomas Jefferson's presidency. Believing economic pressure could tame Britain and France, he signed the Embargo Act, slamming every American port shut and ordering U.S. ships to stay moored. Instead of crippling European powers, the blockade strangled New England's merchants, bankrupted farmers, and sent smugglers swarming over the Canadian border. Protests flared from Boston wharves to Louisiana bayous as Jefferson's own supporters questioned his Republican creed. By the time he admitted the experiment had backfired, the Sage of Monticello stood accused of sacrificing prosperity and principle on the altar of idealism. August 24th, 1814, stands as the darkest day of James Madison's presidency. British troops stormed into Washington, D.C., torching the Capitol, the White House, the Treasury, and every symbol of the fledgling republic's power, while Madison and his cabinet fled under a blackened sky. Militias melted away, official records turned to ash, and for one harrowing night the nation's capital glowed like a beacon of defeat. Though the invaders withdrew the next day, the smoldering ruins exposed America's military frailty and seared an image of vulnerability onto Madison's wartime record. March 6, 1820, was the darkest day of James Monroe's presidency. Pressured to keep the Union from tearing, he signed the Missouri Compromise, admitting Missouri as a slave state and etching a line across the western territories that declared where human bondage could and could not exist. Cheers for peace rang in Congress, but abolitionists howled, slaveholders demanded more, and the ink fixed sectional rivalry into federal law. Monroe, the last president of the Revolutionary generation, had meant to buy time. Instead, he branded the map with a fault line that would rumble for 40 years and finally explode in civil war. March 4th, 1829, was the darkest day of John Quincy Adams' presidency. Outside the Capitol, jubilant crowds hailed Andrew Jackson as the people's champion, but Adams was nowhere in sight. He had slipped out of Washington before dawn, refusing to attend his rival's inauguration. 4 years earlier, he had entered office through a disputed House vote. Now he departed alone, branded an elitist usurper and abandoned by his own party. Carriages splashed mud on the empty reviewing stand, and the sixth president's legacy seemed to wash away with it. In the young republic's first transfer of power steeped in bitterness, Adams discovered how swiftly public favor can turn, and how cold the Capitol feels when it does. December 22nd, 1828, shattered Andrew Jackson's world. Just weeks after his landslide election, his wife Rachel collapsed from a heart attack. Her spirit eroded, Jackson believed, by campaign slanders calling their marriage adulterous. The president-elect wept over her coffin, vowing eternal vengeance on those who had killed her with words, and entered the White House clad in black, the halls heavy with mourning crepe. For the next 8 years he governed behind a veil of grief, every veto and dual-sharp rebuke echoing the loss he could neither forgive nor forget. In that single winter night, victory tasted of ashes, and Jackson's presidency began beneath a widow's cloak. May 10, 1837, plunged Martin Van Buren's presidency into darkness. New York banks suspended payments in gold and silver, and a domino line of failures thundered across the nation. The Panic of 1837. Shops shuttered, wages vanished, and jobless crowds jammed city streets begging for bread, while the new president clung to laissez-faire creed, insisting the storm must blow itself out.